Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the LexisNexis webinar for What's Next post-AML CFT implementation. This is the second webinar in our series regarding the anti-money laundering legislation that was introduced in the middle of this year. And today's session we've prepared in the hope that we can help provide you guidance and some tools and tips as to how to move forward post-implementation. So today's agenda, we'll be covering a few particular areas of interest. The first one is customer due diligence, taking a closer look at customer onboarding processes and the ongoing due diligence requirements under the Act and Regs. The importance of transaction monitoring and how to tie that back to your risk plan and risk assessment. Ensuring the overall compliance program remains relevant, up to date, and that you've got documentation to prove as such. The annual reporting and auditing process, what to expect, and then we'll finish up today with some practical considerations around due diligence tools that are available today. I'd firstly like to introduce today's esteemed presenters. Our first two presenters who will be talking through the slides together are Gary Hughes, who's a partner at Wilson Hale, brings a wealth of AML expertise to today's webinar. And good morning, Gary, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
And I'd also like to introduce Bernie McKendry, who's the Director of Enterprise Risk Services at Deloitte. Good morning, Bernie.
Good morning, Aaron. Morning, everybody.
No doubt to a lot of participants on the call, one or other of these names will be quite familiar to you. So please do feel free to make this an interactive session. We'll go through how we can do that a little bit later in the slide deck. Myself, Aaron Cleveland-Millwood, so I am a risk and compliance specialist based within LexisNexis and work with clients both in Australia and New Zealand around their risk screening solutions. So I'll be talking towards the end of the slide as well. A little bit of housekeeping. The presenters will, of course, introduce the key themes of importance today. We will have discussion after each theme, and also welcome you to send any questions that you have, as you have them, to the email address on screen, which is risk@lexisnexis.co.nz. So we will both have Q&A at the end of today's session, as well as at the end of each session of discussion. So a rough outline of what we're hoping to achieve today. The first one is getting a feel for moving beyond the implementation phase. No doubt a lot of people on the webinar today have spent considerable time and energy over the last 6 to 12 months getting ready for the implementation. What is life like beyond that, of course, very important moving forward. The importance of being regulator ready. So making sure that in a practical sense, we are doing everything that we can to basically keep the regulators on side and we're complying with the Act, and some practical considerations that may align with that. So now, without further ado, I'll hand over to our presenters. Bernie, I believe you're kicking off.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, I am. This slide will be familiar with some of you, or certainly the headlines will be. The one at the top in particular just sort of highlighted to me that maybe in implementing this legislation we hadn't quite got it right out at the grassroots in respect of training and education and what needs to happen, or we've been a little bit overzealous in the way we had presented it so that you get that knee-jerk reaction and we instantly see a customer's funds, which of course we are not technically allowed to do. So the things that at the top of it we're seeing, or topically seeing, post-30th of June is many organisations have not gone back and revisited their risk assessment. So when the legislation was launched 2 years ago, everybody rushed out and completed a risk assessment. As the process has gone on and programs have been implemented, they have evolved and developed and changed, and more guidance has come out. Working groups have been established within the industry. There's been more communication and discussion, and things have definitely moved on. Many organisations have actually not gone back and revisited their risk assessment. It may also be that the risk assessment was developed and projected by a group of individuals who have moved on from the organisation. And we've seen several instances when we've actually gone in to audit the risk assessment that those currently responsible for maintaining and updating it, that is the AML CFT compliance officer, can't actually undertake that task, doesn't understand the rationale, the methodology, or the approach that was taken initially. That's not going to help you pass the hurdle of maintaining and keeping your risk assessment current. The risk assessment also is the basis for your AML program. So going through this presentation, I'll keep reiterating those 2 points. You must have some way of managing and keeping your risk assessment up to date. That in turn must feed your AML program. And the two go hand in hand. Next slide. So customer due diligence, onboarding, what is sufficient? How do we verify that the customer is who they say they are? Now, for all intents and purposes here, you can take what is provided, and I'm going to say at face value in inverted commas. We are not the police, we are not the FIU. When a person presents you with a passport and you can identify who they are from that or some other means as outlined in the code, and there is a new amended code out, and Gary will touch on that in the next slide. But you are not to second guess or go any deeper than taking what you have been provided by the customer. If of course you are suspicious, then collect your evidence and by all means submit a suspicious transaction report. We do need to document how we have verified their existence. And one of the things that we are noting in the industry is that New Zealanders are still getting up to speed with the fact that they must maintain written evidence. There must be a logical thought process as to why they've got the pieces of paper that they had and what they have kept and maintained. In the reviews we've done, and we've been doing readiness reviews of the program, and we've also been looking at control design. As the legislation was only implemented on the 30th of June, a lot of the controls that organisations have put in place haven't had time to operate effectively for us to go in and actually do an operational effectiveness audit. So we have been doing readiness reviews, but whenever you prepare anything, you must keep in the back of your mind that it has to stand up to the scrutiny of a supervisor or regulator who may do an on-site visit, your independent auditor who does not understand the business as well as you do. So you've got to think of it as being looked at through a third-party lens. What is ongoing due diligence and how does it fit with transaction monitoring? I've thrown this question in here because one of the things we've seen is a lot of organisations will go, well, because we're monitoring these transactions which we consider high risk, that is our ongoing due diligence and customer monitoring. Internationally, the terms that are used, and you'll see it coming through FATF and some of the other international websites, and we've got some examples of those in the pack that will be sent out. You'll hear, know your customer's business. So ongoing due diligence is a lot more than just monitoring transactions. If your customer, for example, decided to extend their business and take on a subsidiary or, extend into a larger product, that's, you understanding what that change means for their business and how you're actually going to have to continue to do your monitoring. They may move in your transaction monitoring in terms of your rules and parameters from one area into another, and you need to be aware of that. So a customer who might have gone through your automated transaction monitoring before may now be coming up regularly on your alert system simply because the nature of their business has changed. So ongoing due diligence can be managed in several ways, and it should be done in the easiest way at any point of contact with the customer. In each organisation, it'll vary. It may be that you have a call centre, it may be face-to-face, it may be via the internet. But as soon as a customer initialises that interaction, you should have a means of recording that in your customer information system. Your staff should be trained to say, well, I can update your information based on this. They are now doing this or that or whatever. And you should be able to record that. It can be manual or automated, but it is a good piece of evidence to keep in terms of being able to demonstrate if we come on board to look at what you're doing, then you are actually doing some ongoing due diligence. And what does that actually mean going forward? Customer information systems, and these are many and varied, and in the large financial institutions, you'll find they have quite a range of them. That information is used at the business front face, and that's what you should be using, again, as I say, to be able to demonstrate to someone through reporting or back-end monitoring in your compliance program that this is how you actually undertake this activity. Gary, I will now pass over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Aaron, can you hear me all right?
Crystal clear, thanks, Aaron.
Good. All right. Yeah, look, continuing with the theme, I guess we're in a situation now where we've survived the first quarter, if you like, the first 3 months of the new regime, and back in June everybody went fuel. Thank goodness we've dragged ourselves across the line and we're making compliant or completely compliant. Now that we've had a bit of time just to work through some teething issues and see how things are panning out, there's just a few selective issues that I would like to touch on this slide, and they are selective, just things that I've seen with clients or in speaking with the supervisors and issues that have popped up. If you've been following the news, and hopefully you have, then you will have seen that the Code of Practice on identity verification was reissued and amended for this week. There were some consultation processes around that earlier. The changes are incremental, I guess, not radically changing. And remember, this is a Code of Practice that is essentially best practice and to provide you with a safe harbour if you follow exactly. So it's not a mandatory document, although it's certainly good practice. And there are some procedural matters you need to go through if you're not going to follow. I guess just to touch on, you can see when you get the document itself off the supervisor's website, you can see the changes. There are things like moving with the times, I guess, to include biometric data as a verification means, where people are not these days relying just on signature or written means. And things like electronic sources of verification as well. So, and that includes little details like the inclusion last time around of address as part of the electronic verification code. That has been dropped. But the thing to realise is that does not mean the whole obligation to collect and verify address has been dropped. It's just come out of the code and it's still there as a legal obligation. So you still have to have some means of ascertaining address, and obviously recent utility bill or something like that is a very common means. I was going to touch on customer based overseas and the international process there. The way in which that has previously been drafted based around a trusted referee has caused some difficulty for entities that have a lot of their customer base overseas. And so the international certification is slightly broader now, allowing, depending on which country it is, anybody who is authorised by law in that country to take a declaration or an oath can be the referee. There's a lot of problems though if you think about certain countries where there's not a ready availability of such people, or their laws might be quite restrictive and require something like a notary public, which there's not that many of them around, and they need to charge a lot of money for their witnessing service. So in certain countries we're still going to find problems with complying with the code in the area, I suspect. Of course also the code's got its limitations. It's only for low and medium risk customers who are individuals, not companies, and so you still have to have something, a separate process, something more onerous if you like, or applying the higher scrutiny to what you consider your high risk customers. Well, mentioning trust and beneficial owners, and I'm very tentative about getting into this because it could occupy an hour, I suspect, in its own right. The simple fact is there are an awful lot of trust structures out there, probably more than we thought. The Law Commission recently estimated 500,000 trusts in New Zealand, and that might be on the light side, I suspect. It's very difficult to work your way through some of those tangles around beneficial ownership. There is some guidance from the supervisors and also a more recent clarification note that's out there as well. Although some people have said to me, don't know how much does it really clarify. And the fact remains this is a difficult area. I guess always keep a focus on who is the customer in whatever situation you're examining. Is the customer, or is the trust itself your customer, or merely an upstream owner or a participant? And bear in mind, of course, the regulations which are there to help you to some extent in some situations where you can identify beneficiaries by class rather than every last person. We are seeing in the market a lot of misunderstanding and kind of resistance around this area, even from professional or corporate trustees who are being dragged, kicking and screaming against the regime and having to get used to it. I think all we can do is ride that period out, hopefully, as people will become more informed, those verifications will be less. Outsourcing CDD, there's a bit of that going on in terms of the reliance on third parties, and the only point I would make there is that there is a need for a clear agreement or communication about who is relying on whom, if it's an agent or another reporting entity, what are they going to do for you, how is information to be collected, and do you have assurances that it will be provided to you in a timely way. There's a time restriction in the Act, as you're probably aware, for that information to come through. So remember that at the end of the day, the reporting entity is responsible, even if you outsource some of those duties. So you need to be regularly checking and, I guess, auditing what your agent or what that person is doing on your behalf, because you will remain on the hook for it. And I just mentioned just a couple of things which are more commercial or market issues we're seeing. In some subsectors, there's a lack of industry consensus. People are applying things in different ways. It's to be expected to some extent because everyone's circumstances are different and they're entitled to take a risk-based approach in their own circumstances. But if there are clear anomalies or glitches or people are finding that there are market distortions going on and it's not a level playing field as some people are interpreting the rules one way and others are interpreting a different way, then I think an industry working group or a discussion with the supervisor at some level is probably a good idea as we continue to work through those things. Then the next time I'll probably just leave that there. We can circle back to some of these things in discussion or questions. So next slide, Heather.
Thank you, Gary. The next topic that we wanted to take a little bit of a walk through is transaction monitoring. Now, what you've got up on the screen at the moment is what I call a cycle overview. Up to the left-hand side, you will have had the initial risk assessment that you undertook. Most or a lot of the information that actually fed that initial risk assessment, unless you were necessarily one of the larger financial institutions, would be judgment-based. You may have been able to extract some data, certainly around the nature, size and complexity of your business and the volumes and values related to certain customer types, certain product types over certain channels, etc. But it would have been fairly limited. Once you've implemented your transaction monitoring system, and remember, to be cost effective, we take a risk-based approach, and you don't have to pump everything through either a manual or automated system. What you might find is, if there's sufficient volume to justify the cost, then absolutely you would go down the automated route. On the other hand, if you're doing large values but smaller volume, it may be easy to do your actual monitoring of what goes through these transactions by extracting that data and then just doing some simple scenario analysis around it. So it's got to be fit for purpose, it's got to be driven from your risk assessment, and you've got to keep it up to date. The diagram on the right is our way of sort of saying it's constant. It's got to be constantly feeding back. There's a feedback loop. So you need to be very clear in your program how you're going to keep it current. When something changes, maybe you even need to then go back and revisit your risk assessment, and the two have to be intrinsically linked. In terms of the rules and parameters, now these are the rules that you set that are aligned to your business based on the analysis that you've done about where your risk sits. So, roughly high, medium and low, and what you're actually going to put through your monitoring system, be it manual or automated. There has to be a feedback process. That has to be regularly reviewed. So, for example, it's a known factor that when you close the door to money launderers in one area, they'll scurry around and look for another area or a way to break into the system. That's why there's constant information and guidance being shared globally. You have to factor that in. You yourselves, when you monitor your transactions, and I can say this hand on heart because I've seen it every time I've been involved in an implementation of an automated system, you will find out information about your customers and the way they manage their accounts that is a surprise to you. You will find some indications that either indicate fraud or indicate money laundering, and it happens every time. When I was at Lloyd's in London, we had a large unit up in Birmingham that actually did our transaction monitoring. Our rules and parameters were updated on a regular basis. And I say regular, so I'm talking monthly or less. That information too was then fed back into our training modules. So the things that you need to consider when you're implementing either a manual or automated training system, you need to keep that feedback loop going and building it back into your front-end processes. Prior to some of your transaction monitoring, you might have assumed that it was all right to do these customer types were, say, medium risk. They've now moved into an area where things are happening within their accounts that you hadn't seen before. You feel the risk has gone up, you now want to do some transaction monitoring. You need to then build that into training and saying to people, right, we're now going to do this when we onboard people, and for this particular type of customer using this product, we now want to undertake enhanced due diligence. And when I come in as an auditor or a supervisor comes in to do an on-site visit, we're going to want to know how, when we're looking at your program, how you do that. How do you keep it up to date? How do you keep it current? How do you manage that feedback loop? You get a little bit of a help in this in some respects, and I'm going to mention the annual reporting briefly, although Gary will touch on it further in the presentation. But there's a lot of information now that you're having to supply your supervisors. So if you haven't yet had a look at the annual report and worked out how you're going to extract the data, you very much need to go and do it. And if I was a supervisor, I would be taking your annual report and I would be picking up your risk assessment and I would be saying, this is the information that's supplied in terms of nature, size and complexity of this business aligned to what they've just reported in their annual report. So you need to build in that mechanism and checking mechanism and feedback mechanism to make sure that everything is kept aligned and is actually kept up to date. One of the things you'll find when you initially alter any of your rules and parameters, and most of you will have been down this road as you implement it if you've got a software solution or even if you're doing it manually, you get what I call a bubble of noise or a bubble of alerts. So most of you too will probably be tiering your alerts, so there will be ones that will be a hit in your transaction monitoring system simply because you can't tighten the rules tight enough for all the oddities that may go through given the nature of the business that you're operating in. So you will come up with what you would call your white list or good rules, and this information will be right. When these people hit, we take a simple look at them, they're tier 1, and then we just pass them through. We don't want to actually change our rules and parameters at this stage because we might decide that that would actually open up the floodgates to allowing some money laundering to go through our system and wouldn't give us a defensible position if we had to stand up in front of either our supervisor or an international supervisor or the auditor and demonstrating that we've done the right thing. So you get that initial bubble and over time you work out what you're seeing, and then you'll see oddities. You'll get used to picking up oddities or things that you go, actually I can tell by the very nature of this that there needs to be further investigation. And that would become your tier 2 alert, and they would go into your financial crime team or whoever you have nominated to actually do the investigation. With all that occurring though, you have to keep going back and revisiting, are we in the right place? Is this right? And then if this change is significant enough, do we actually need to revisit our risk assessment and then adapt our AML program in terms of some of the stuff that may be happening at the front line differently, and then again build that into your training requirements. So this is an ongoing process. It's going to have to keep happening year on year on an ongoing basis. A couple of things I would like to stress in terms of in-house and third party. And Gary sort of mentioned it, make sure you've definitely got some contracts in place. As a reporting entity, you are accountable, you don't outsource the responsibility. If you're using an automated monitoring system that is from a third-party supplier, which you can, you need to be able to, again, demonstrate to the supervisor and or your auditor how you influence them to keep it up to date. So going outside to a provider makes it very easy to keep up to date with changes that are happening through industry information, international information and guidance, but it doesn't tick the box in terms of keeping that tool up to date specifically aligned to your business, your risk assessment and what goes on with you on a day-to-day basis. So you have to be able to demonstrate with your transaction monitoring system if you're using either an internal third party, if you're part of a designated business group, or an external third-party provider, how they are actually achieving that for you. So if I think of the larger financial institutions that have got parent companies offshore, they may already have bought into the product that they're using simply because the parent company's been operating it for years. you still have to be able to say how that New Zealand component operates and how you influence the changes in those rules. And just very briefly, I'll mention that if you are using an external third party, always in your contract get the right to audit, because you haven't, that's for the accountability or responsibility, and you can get an ISAE 3402 review done. So in the guidance on audit, having your risk assessment and program audited, it does talk about those international standards. I won't delve into them too much here. We will be touching on them again later on, but it's something worth remembering, that it is actually your accountability and your responsibility. You've also got to understand how your model works, and we don't have to look too far in terms of giving examples of where people have completed their risk assessment when the legislation was introduced, developed a model when the legislation was introduced, and it just runs along tickety-boo and they've never gone back and revisited it. And just go to the Austrac website and have a look at what happened to our Australian colleagues when the legislation was implemented there 3 years ago. So there's a nice little, there's a lot of information about what hasn't been done. You know, now they're starting to get the supervisor over there, you know, Austrac saying, we're coming in to look at you, and it's a case of rushing to the shelf, blowing the dust off the risk assessment, trying to work out, oh my God, how was this done? It was done 3 years ago. No one that did it is here anymore. We don't understand it. So it is an extremely good idea at this point in time, if you haven't already done it, to have your risk assessment at least audited or looked at by an independent third party, because they can provide you value in terms of, well, if we can't re-perform it, then how are you going to manage to be able to do that or demonstrate to your supervisor or actual auditor that it can be kept current and that you can actually re-perform the risk assessment as you are required to do. Bottom underneath all of this, and I sort of can't stress it enough, is with all the evidence you keep and how you tie it together, know your customer's business, work out how that, the information you collect, links back into your customer information system. And it may be that you categorise and group your different client types, and you can say, well, once every year or once every 18 months, this is what a standard customer that looks like, that has, say for an example, you know, a checking account or a savings account or uses investment products A, and just run that through your system and validate that the customers that are sitting in there are still operating that way, you know. So you could say that, you know, there is a typical profile for a student. You could say that there's probably a typical profile for, you know, a newly married couple that sits in your demographic here. The way the accounts operate and managed are probably very much the same. So if you don't want to put in an automated system as such, there's probably a lot of scope for doing things in terms of being able to demonstrate that, knowing your customer and knowing your customer's business and how they operate by doing that sort of analytics. Always maintain and keep your records, and I can't stress that enough. The one thing that we've grappled with a lot, and particularly with the audit work we've done, and when you get under the audit regime it's slightly different, but you know, businesses are very happy to tell us what they've done, and they can describe it to us, and some can describe it in quite a lot of detail, but there is absolutely no written evidence to support that is what actually happened. So, you know, again, as you develop your transaction monitoring system and your ongoing account monitoring system, as you build up your processes, as you tweak and change them, because you will, keep a record of it, keep that bit of evidence, document what you've done so you can demonstrate what you did, and that way the supervisor and or auditor coming in to look, with that independent third set of eyes, will be able to say, okay, I can see what you're saying, you've now shown me the evidence. We can't go by hearsay, unfortunately, as much as we would probably like to. So I can't actually stress that enough. And Gary, I'll now hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. I think just to recap a couple of Jenny's comments there, we're typically faced with the initial choice, which everyone will have thought about and taken a decision on a long time ago, and that's are we going to go with a manual system or a highly automated piece of transaction monitoring software or something in between. If you're an entity that perhaps only has a dozen customers or you're providing regulated services to only a dozen customers a day, then you may be able to monitor each and every transaction. If you're a bank obviously dealing in hundreds of thousands of transactions a day, then you want a very strict piece of IT that's going to help you with that. For this discussion, I might just assume that we're somewhere in the middle, and these fares of a size and a nature that it might be looking at a mix of manual and automated systems, some type of extension reporting system. But just go back to basics. If you don't have the language device testing, you might want to start with the law in Section 31 of the Act, which gives you the reasons and the things you need to be monitoring. And there's a lot of overlap here with ongoing customer due diligence and transaction monitoring. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, I think. I suggested on the slide 4 purposes for what we're doing here, and probably the first two are the most critical. You need to know and be aware of what your customers are up to, and to check that the things they do now and in the future remain consistent with the information you have about them. What do we know about them? Where is their behaviour changing, deviating from a normal sort of transaction? So that then enables you to go back and refresh and figure out where you need to update your customer due diligence. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, you have a lawful obligation to report any transaction that is suspicious, and you need to work backwards and have a process for identifying what is suspicious, figuring out what sort of things are unusual, and making sure that all the grounds that might trigger that lawful obligation for you can be met. The third and fourth points there are just kind of additional purposes or things that really need to be or can practically be looped into your transaction monitoring. So you need to identify when, for existing customers, the information you have might be outdated or inadequate. There is obviously a bit of a compliance let-off for existing customers to some extent. You don't need to go back and re-interrogate them with a fresh set of customer due diligence like you do for new customers. But you need to be aware of when there are changes, when the nature of the relationship is different, when you realise that the information you have about that customer is actually out of date or is insufficient. And possibly when, if you have done standard CDD on them, you become aware of circumstances where they might need to move to enhance. So you need to move those things into the basis for your monitoring, really. The methods, well, there's several ways of going about it, as we've talked about. A lot of it should, and indeed does, rely on staff to detect things, because it doesn't matter how much you automate these systems, at the end of the day, the intuitions and the eyes and ears of your staff will be told in picking up when something is abnormal or unusual, or simply doesn't make sense in a customer's behaviour. So don't underestimate the value of staff and having them well trained. Regular extension reporting, this is probably the most common for a lot of these two. That is where you need a set of regular parameters, a set of internal reports that might be manual or might be computer generated, but they will identify for you on a regular basis where things are moving or deviating from the norm. And of course that poses the question, what is the norm for us, for this particular industry, for this customer or this type of customer, indeed for our industry. So you need to thought about that in terms of you and build those elements or those parameters into your monitoring system. And then under the heading I've called details, there's several points of interest here. I think as Bernie stressed, you need to come back to your risk assessment regularly, and it can be a help as much as a hindrance. People sometimes find it a burden that they have to keep revising and looking at the risk assessment. I would talk about it a different way, that if you do it well and you do it right, you'll realise you can prioritise certain things. You can't monitor everything if you're a large entity, and so you need a respectable, demonstrable way of prioritising, filtering out what is low risk and may not need the same level of monitoring or attention, and focusing your resources on the higher risk things. So you've got to tie it back to your risk assessment. That will include the inherent elements of the customer or the product or the services. So all those inherent risks that hopefully will be noted and detailed in your risk assessment, you need to link those in, and you need to refine them and reinforce them from time to time. You also need to look at things that may not be an inherent element of customer risk, but might be more behavioural. What type of transaction is coming through, what sort of customer behaviour is going on, and We talk about those as red flags sometimes. So if you haven't already got familiar with it, the police FIU has put out their revised guidelines on suspicious transaction reports, and that contains a fairly thorough list of red flags or transactional behavioural things that might be considered unusual. Not all of them will apply to each entity or indeed each subsector, but it's a good place to start if you're developing a list of red flags or parameters that you want to be monitoring. And then there's that benchmark pointed in there as well. How do we figure out what is unusual? Well, let's look at some peer group comparator or some history as to what this customer has done. If this is a customer that we know as a seasonal business and every year we'll be sending money overseas to a particular destination, then we have an understanding from the history as to why that's happening, and so it doesn't need to be flagged up every year as a potential problem. It's probably all to say there, although I did skip over the obligation to keep written findings. I might revert to that in a little while, so let's just carry on back to you, I think, at this point, David.
Ladies and gentlemen, just before we proceed, I do have a question around transaction monitoring. This particular participant is looking for some typical examples of red flags within the monitoring system that may suggest money laundering or fraudulent activity. I guess a comment I'll make to that, Gary, is obviously that's going to depend on the type of business. But any suggested any clear and obvious activities that we should be looking out for when we're monitoring transactions?
Yeah, well, look, the place to start, as I mentioned, are the STR guidelines. So you can find those actually put up on the FIU website, and they have a typical list of red flags, but kind of things that are related to higher value. So you might well have a threshold or control about a certain dollar value, and you might want to report every week or every day that says how many transactions came through above that value. Or it might be around how many transactions are happening on an account. If we have a type of customer that should only be making a few transactions a week and then suddenly there's 50 in 1 week, you want to know about that. You want something in the system that will detect that. But I'd encourage you to look at the STR guidelines first and foremost.
Just to add to that, in terms of the transaction monitoring, and you're saying what would be a red flag for you as well, you will find money launderers like to get their money out pretty quickly. So as Gary said, it's the many transactions in a short time frame. And particularly if you look at what your product ranges and your customer ranges, you can do some data analytics and say, well, this is what we consider normal for our type of business. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I've seen in different industries. One was New Zealand based, where you put some scanning software into the financial institution, one of the larger banks I was once working at, and we noticed that there was a student on one of the campuses who was putting millions of dollars through their account on a monthly basis. They were working part-time in a fish and chip shop, and they had a side business selling fish hooks. That actually was investigated by the police, and it found out that they were actually sending a lot of money back up through into Asia, so they were actually laundering money from the proceeds of crime. There was one internationally. I worked for a funds manager, an investment organisation, and we banked high net worth individuals who you could not say had a usual pattern at all in terms of what they did. So for an account monitoring on their perspective, we could still build up a demographic of the sorts of things they were buying and what they liked to do. So as long as it was around, buying and selling new cars, new houses, and doing international travel, we didn't worry too much. It was when, they sort of went off and did something unusual, like bought a whole pile of computers down in South America, and say, well, actually, they do like to spend money, but they actually don't like to go out and buy a whole lot of computers down in South America. So it needs to be aligned with what your business is, and you need to do the data analytics and understand it. We recently did a large piece of data analytics work for a group of organisations that were similar. and we found that one of them, oddly enough, seemed to be using telephone banking to transfer large amounts of money on, we called it an irregular pattern, but the money was, going up and down in value, but was happening on an regular basis, and so we suggested to the organisation concerned, that they might like to go back and revisit that organisation and that customer. Are there any more questions, Aaron, or shall we proceed on?
No, for the time being, I do have some more, but we might leave them towards the end just to see how we go for time.
Thank you. On the next slide, you'll see that I've actually just put up Section 57 Minimum Requirements for the AML program. And there's a couple of reasons for doing this. The points that I've highlighted are clearly the ones that I want to talk to. So your AML program must be based on your risk assessment. And again, I'm putting on a supervisor's visitor's hat or a auditor's hat, and you have to be able to show that to me. You have to say the reason that you are doing enhanced due diligence on this category of customers or on this particular range of products or whatever it is because from your risk assessment you consider these to be medium or high risk. Now in the risk assessment, we are not assessing your judgment. We're not going to say you're right or wrong. We are going to want to see when we audit it what you've covered, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually get to what does an audit look like. But we are going to want to see how your program is driven by your risk assessment. And when your risks change or your risk profile changes, you must update your program. There are two parts to the program. It talks about include adequate and effective policies, procedures and controls. Now, adequate talks about the adequacy of design. Have those policies, procedures and controls been designed effectively to mitigate the risks that you're addressing? And that's the MLFT risk that is posed, and that will come from your risk assessment. And then we look at operational effectiveness. And as I said, our audits have to be for a period of time. Those controls have to have been in place for a period of time. So with policies and procedures, what we call directive controls, we also want to see a mix of detective and preventative controls. And if you can't always put the right control in, that there might be a mitigating control that you can rely on. And we want to know how you get assurance that those policies, procedures and controls operate effectively. And that's what we're going to look at. So if you go down, and I'll just talk to the first slide here, vetting and training senior managers, the AML Chief Compliance Officer, and other employees that are engaged in AML CFT duties. That means it has to be different. So for us, the roles and responsibilities that senior management has, and that's outlined in the Act, and the AML CFT Compliance Officer are different from some of your frontline staff who may just be doing onboarding. Therefore, your training requirements will be different. We've seen examples after training and vetting where we've come to have a look at the control design, that it's just the organisation has come up with some training and it's across the board and everybody gets it. And it hasn't been tailored necessarily either to the risk assessment or necessarily tailored to those roles. So I certainly would expect an AML CFT compliance officer that actually understands what their obligations are under the Act. And I've spoken to a couple who certainly do not know that. They've delegated down in their organisation somewhere into, say, their financial crime team or unit who is actually going to be running the processes for them, and they can't actually articulate what their responsibilities are. Now, I would then have to say, well, you're not adequately trained for the role that you've got. So you really need to think about that. And you need to think about when you deliver that, the records that you maintain demonstrate to me how you've done it. We've talked about complying with due diligence requirements, reporting suspicious transactions and record keeping. You also need to set out what you are going to do, what you need to continue to do to manage and mitigate the risk. And also under Section 11, you have to be able to demonstrate compliance with the AML CFT program. So running a compliance program over the top demonstrates how you as an organisation get comfort that your policies, procedures and controls are operating effectively. Section G there says examining and keeping written findings related to. So examining means you need to do some analysis and determination, right? You're going to examine something and come out with a result. If you go to bullet point 3, it says any other activity that the reporting entity regards as being particularly likely by its nature to relate to money laundering and financing of terrorism. So I'm going to come along and I'm going to look at the elements of your AML program, and a lot of organisations have done what we call a summary AML program document, because your policies and procedures will live in different places and your controls out of the cold face in the front line will vary from business unit or subsidiary or type of business to type of business. Certainly if you have multiple points of customer onboarding and doing your ongoing due diligence. So you need to be able to say to me how you've considered that point. How you've looked at the nature, size and complexity of the business that you're operating in now, and if it's going to change, and how you may have something that, by what you do, would make you susceptible or more susceptible to money laundering and financing of terrorism. What we've suggested to several of our clients is, you know, when you're actually running your workshops to do your risk assessment way back 2 years ago, some of the scenarios or possible scenarios that you may have come up with out of those workshops that said, this is how, in our organisation, we believe this could be perpetrated. Those are the things that you then need to say somewhere in your documentation that you considered this, and we believe that this is where we are susceptible due to the nature of our business, and this is how it fits in with our program, and this is how we've risk assessed it. So we actually want to see documented evidence of that, because that's a key point that you're required to be able to demonstrate under the Act. Next slide, please, Aaron, and Gary, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thanks, Benny. Just the rest of Section 57, and look, I think we make no apology for hammering Section 57. At the end of the day, it lists out all the critical elements that need to be in your program, and at the end of the day, you'll have to, when it comes to audit it or annual report time, you'll have to revisit it to see how we're going against those things. So it is the legal standard that entities will be held to. Just to note quickly a couple of things. The highlighted and on the previous slide and this one, we're just emphasising that for obligations on an ongoing or recurring nature, it's written in the present tense. It says, are we preventing the use of our products for money laundering? Are we monitoring and managing compliance? So again, it all emphasises this has to be a living, breathing process that you regularly undertake. We touched there on examining and keeping written findings about certain things, and on the previous slide it talks about complex and large transactions and things that have no apparent economic or lawful purpose. At the top of this slide, H talks about countries that might be a bit dodgy in terms of AML regimes. How you examine and what sort of written findings you keep is not spelled out, and where it's up to the organisation to figure that out. But I suggest that it's a useful thing to tie into your monitoring process, so that you are building the audit trail basically. So an example of that would be if you have a transaction from a country that you don't usually deal with, and you're not quite clear on how good their AML systems are, then you might want to just make a note of that. Even if there's nothing that puts you or gets you to the threshold, if this is a suspicious transaction, you might want a record or a log somewhere to say, we looked at this because it was different or unusual, we investigated it and ultimately decided no problem, and there's a perfectly rational explanation for why something is coming in from Azerbaijan this week. So that is a process unfolds over time of keeping written findings, and so you can demonstrate to your auditor or somebody else, the supervisor, what's gone on, and that is actually what will check these things out. The only other thing I'll highlight would be the one under I about favouring for folks and transactions that favour anonymity. Anonymous things are anathema to AML, really. That's a big area of concern, and particularly when you tie that with the obligation back in Section 30 of the Act about new or developing areas of technology. where you're supposed to pay some attention to them in your compliance program and take additional measures as needed. So what that means is a very grey area, even if you trace it back into CFT and the international bodies, there's not a lot of helpful guidance on it, quite frankly, but obviously anything that is around online or internet development, mobile applications for various products, anything that might allow a user just to pick up a device and access or deal with something in a way that gets you even further from a face-to-face conversation or encounter with the customer. And of course, stay up to date with current trends in this area like digital currencies and e-currencies. Many of you would have seen the news in the US about Bitcoin and Silk Road in the last week or two. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google it. But there is going to be an increased focus all around the world on digital currency mechanisms and what they might be, what avenues they might be opening up for people. We're trying to warn the money. Now, as you flip to the next slide, we probably need to catch a little bit of time, so let's sort of flip through. Benny, this might be for you to comment on this slide.
Yes, and thanks, Gary. And conscious of time, I will go a little bit quickly over this. The compliance program, and here I'm not referring to the AML CFT compliance program, but rather how you demonstrate your ongoing compliance with your obligations. So for high-risk areas, we would expect an organisation to actually go out and monitor and check by actual testing and test scripts that you have done what you said you could do. So if I'm a trust, a high-risk customer, and I'm doing enhanced due diligence, then I would actually have my compliance team, or if you're a smaller organisation, even the AML CFT compliance officer may do it themselves, I would go out and check on a sample basis, on a regular basis, that I was collecting the right verification information and I was following the policies and procedures that we've set out. Where you assess something as being low or medium risk, you can use things like controlled self-assessment, where you just go out to the organisation and get them to attest yes, we are doing the right things. You can use QA functions, where again you get someone independent of that function but another business function to validate and check that the quality of what you're doing is in line with your policy, procedures and controls and what you've said your organisation will do. A larger organisation, those that probably have their own internal audit functions and compliance testing areas will actually probably be doing this anyway. You need to do sample testing and you need to do monitoring and oversight. So what does a good compliance program look like? It's got to be fit for purpose for the organisation. It has to be something that, as an auditor, if I came in, I would say, actually, that's really good and I can rely on some of the work you've done. I'll sample test parts of it, but then I can reduce the amount of audit work I need to do in this space. So, the supervisors, the auditors, the AML CFT compliance officer and senior management will be those that rely on it. Gary, I will pass back over to you.
Are you there, Gary?
Sorry, that's the mute button clicking in when I least need it. Here we are.
Yes, crystal clear. Thanks, Gary.
Apologies. Look, we'll just get through this quickly. Hopefully you have a chance to glance at the slide. It's really just hammering the themes about updating things, keeping up to date with announcements from the supervisors or the FIU. There's two or three things that have come through just in the last 2 or 3 months since the system went live. Make sure you're aware of those. And in terms of your program itself, as I said, keep a record of when you are reviewing it and if you're amending it or refining it. Build that up over time so that it's apparent to everybody who comes to look at it that you have considered your compliance program documents and not just sitting on a shelf somewhere gathered. Also, we've touched on training and communication flows. I think are very important. You need to ensure that your training is to the right level and digestible by different people in the organisation. It would be, if the supervisor paid you a visit, it would be all well and good if your compliance officer knows an awful lot and can answer all their questions, but when they go to chat to the teller or the person at the front desk dealing with customers, they really don't have much of an idea or can't tell you where to look for a process or how they do things. So you've got to make sure that flows all the way through the organisation and that junior people are engaged. And that includes when they change and there's turnover of staff, that can be a real problem as well. Right, next slide there, Aaron. Just some stuff there on risk assessment, but I think it's really just variations on the theme that you need to keep your risk assessment current. And if I go right to the bottom slide of that slide, you'll see that even though the risk assessment is going to be scrutinised, perhaps by your internal managers or your internal processes, but certainly by the AML supervisor, at least at time of your annual report, and by external or independent audits as well. So you need to be revisiting that, and as I said earlier, if you do it regularly, you can save yourself time and money. You don't need to be focusing on a whole lot of things that might be relevant for a bank, but are not that relevant to your organisation as what you're doing as a more niche service or a wealth management or trustee service. So don't just start plugging up a lot of red flags without giving it some thought and tying it back to your own personal risk. Next slide. And I think we're into some audit stuff here then, to the extent we haven't covered some of that already.
Thanks, Gary. And in the interest of time, I will skip quickly through this. In the pack that we're providing, I've actually added further information to the slides that you will actually see up in front of you. Essentially, with the audit, we take a very, I'm going to say, black and white view in terms of the requirements of Section 58.3. You have to identify the list, so that means give me a list of all the risks that you've come up with. Make sure it does line up to international and local guidance. Describe, so write some decent words how you will keep your risk assessment current. This includes any changes in your business, any changes in your program, anything that comes in from the supervisors or guidance, and it needs to be done on a regular basis. So it's not just the stuff that's driven from the grassroots of the business, but it's that overarching piece, and you have to list out what those triggers are. So it's very clear to the auditor, also very clear to the business, when this risk assessment needs to be updated. Make it very clear on the methodology and process that you use in determining your risk assessment. Particularly aligned to the relevant obligations under the Act. We've seen a lot of risk assessments whereby, as I said, you couldn't re-perform them, the persons that had done them originally had left the organisation. So I won't labour the points anymore, but please make sure that your risk assessment and your risk assessment process is re-performable, and it does enable your auditor to say, yes, this is how you determine the level of risk. Remember, we're not assessing your judgment of that risk, just the process and how you got there. Next slide, please, Aaron. In terms of just carrying on from there, a couple of things that we're seeing is in the Act, it says on 58.2, you must have regard to the following. Excuse me. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information you're now putting in your annual report that goes towards the nature, size and complexity of your business. Make sure you can explain to us how you have regard to those factors, and they're listed out in the Act. And we have to be able to evidence it and understand how you went through the process. Again, we're not actually auditing the outcomes, but we do need to understand how you've had regard to that. And particularly things where it says like in any other factors that are provided for in regulations. A lot of organisations have been very silent on how they have assessed things that might impact their organisation. And again, we're familiar with the legislation, we're familiar with the guidance, and we're going to ask questions about something that we think may be important to their type of industry or organisation, and we do want to see documented in their risk assessment how they've considered those things. Next slide, please. So this is the AML program. This is a far more onerous exercise than auditing a risk assessment. With the auditing of the AML program, we actually have to do testing. We have to go in and validate the controls are operating effectively. We have to look at the design of controls. We have to do sample testing, and we have to do re-performance. So it's probably even more onerous than having your financial accounts audited, and it will take time. The more you can do under your own compliance compliance program to demonstrate to an auditor and or supervisor how you have managed your own compliance program and maintain that compliance, the less work we have to do. But where you haven't made it clear or you aren't checking or aren't managing your own compliance, then there's more work for us to do and it's going to be more costly to you. Again, I just want to emphasise it's got to be based on the outcomes of your risk assessment. And so far, a lot of what we've looked at, the two are quite independent and in fact in some cases contradictory. We can't evidence the two joining up. You know, you might say something is high risk here, but it's not reflected in your policies and procedures and controls. So you need to be very cognizant and think about that when you put your program together. Next slide, please. And Gary, I believe this is you.
Okay, so just to wrap up really, as well as the audit, you've got your annual report due in August 2014 now. That date has been set, and it sounds like a long way off, but if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to go through what will be involved, what that annual report will entail. And people have not done so often, we're a little bit freaked out at first by the level of detail and what will have to be divulged, including questions like, please confirm that your risk assessment is compliant in all these respects, and if it's not, confirm what respects it's less than ideal and what you've done about it. So there's going to have to be a bit of a thought process, or entities might end up accidentally dogging themselves in when they come to do that annual report. But it does emphasise, I think, the importance of thinking ahead to those obligations now, and if you have an interim audit or assurance function, then great, you should be getting those people involved regularly to check that you can meet and answer all those questions. If not, then get some external help or expertise, somebody who hasn't been involved in setting up the system. The other thing, just to finish off really, I think, in terms of dealings with your supervisor and developing a rapport, that's very important. You'll be having a number of points of engagement with your supervisor, and I've listed some of them out there. Obviously, some of them are of a friendly, informational nature, where you get an email with an announcement that you're on their email list, or there's a new guidance note released, so you'll be hearing from the supervisor then. You might also be part of their monitoring program, so a selection of entities already had an on-site inspection, sort of a planning visit to their premises, to turn everything upside down and see how your compliance is going. Instead of that, you might just have some email or a desk-based review, which are more in the nature of written queries and dialogue. And from time to time in future, the supervisors may find that there's a particular topic or a subsector that needs attention, and you might find special thematic surveys going out. And of course, as well as all that, there might be a time when investigations start or even sort of complaints are made, and you might get some unwelcome, unplanned visits. And at the end of the day, you need to be ready to deal with those and address them. And that's all before you get to the one that is set in stone. Even if you haven't had your supervisor on any of those points, you need to be getting in touch with them August next year. And I'd emphasise that it's important to develop that relationship where you can, particularly around the AML compliance officer. Getting to know the supervisor and presenting to them a picture that your entity is genuinely trying to comply, even if some of the obligations are vague and unclear, that you're really making an effort to get on top of it. And that can even lead to things like turnover of compliance officer or change of compliance officer. Just to finish with a little anecdote, I was involved in a conference speaking last year in Australia, and Ultratrack was engaged in quite some interesting debate as to when they had got to know an AML compliance officer and that person had left, sometimes rather suddenly, they would be interested in the quality of their replacement and the reasons for the departure. And wasn't the case of a person just taking a different or better job, or wasn't a case of cutbacks from senior management in the compliance department. So these things are real, that if you have an AML officer who's respected, then that relationship needs to be nurtured, and the business itself needs to manage the situation when that person comes to be replaced. Look, I think we've probably gone over time. I apologise for that. Shall we look at some questions at this point, Aaron?
Look, just conscious of the time for our participants and realise you may have other meetings to move towards. Ladies and gents, we do have a number of questions sent to our email address. However, we might address those offline with you post-webinar. So do feel free to continue to send through your questions to risk@lexisnexis.co.nz, and we will get back to you promptly. Both Tony and Gary, of course, will be able to respond to those. Look, on behalf of all of us, we do appreciate your time on today's call. Gary and Bernie, thank you very much for your insights and expertise as to what is happening out there in the marketplace and expectations. Great. And of course, to all our participants, we will be sharing the slide deck and information post this webinar. Thanks again, everybody.